that's an example of, like more like early intervention, right? Like
Yeah.
you're there, you're in the room, like you're making sure that they have somebody to check in on him, especially when the teacher isn't able to control the kiddo, and I understand that. Um, and that brings me to this other point that, prevention, the reason I say prevention, early intervention is the prevention part is sort of this umbrella. And one of the branches is outreach, right? That's usually how you're going to really help kids, especially at a young age, start to identify their feelings. Just having, somebody come in and talk about your feelings, having somebody talk about bullies. I usually think about it more like it's typically known more like at the high school, middle school level where you talk about sex and drugs. I remember in 5th grade, like that's when we had the talk in school. But it sort of behooves a lot of schools to really start exploring some of those things even at an earlier age, just trying to get kids more comfortable with sharing their feelings, whether it's knowing how to associate them with colors, or knowing, songs about it, or being able to know what to do when a bully is doing something, right? Which, it's hard for me to really remember all of this stuff until middle school, as far as like personally wise, like I don't really remember a lot of this happening in elementary school. And I mean, part of it is probably just my own fucking moments of like long-term memory, but I guess it just wasn't as significant, where I really didn't feel like I had somebody come in and teach me about these things.
Because for the most part, we didn't have really big, like movements like that. I think elementary school was like maybe little stuff. They would do like little assemblies where not everybody's really paying attention, but they definitely was like, oh, middle school, it's a whole new world.
Doing fire drills, bro. I've never seen anything like it.
Was like sex talk. You got, peer pressure. What the fuck is that? You get a little booklet on peer pressure. This is what you guys might get into. Middle school, yeah, you definitely get a lot more nuances.
I remember seeing the DARE thing come out in middle school.
Okay, DARE is a very controversial subject, though, because,
that came. I mean, in middle school, that came
that's
out.
been proven
That's
it's a failure. It's a flop.
Yeah,
that'll stop anyone doing drugs.
Definitely gotta say, I love how the field of outreach like that has definitely evolved. I remember, Dr. J over here and I were fucking putting on classes, dude, once a week over at Cristo Rey in high school, and we would just take like a mental health topic, and we just like, we would be assigned a class of 20, 30 kids that day, and then we would just like talk about that subject or like lead like an activity or something like that. I think that's the height of what I've seen about outreach, where it's like you're really are doing prevention. We're not even like pulling somebody out. We're just giving that education to the whole class. Just something that's not part of your everyday lesson planning. Like, we're not talking about math. We're not talking about some historical event that you might not even remember 20 years later because you read it in a book. No, we're just talking about like, all right, who here has talked about feelings before? What does anger look like? What does sadness look like? Who's ever had to like comfort somebody? You guys know what empathy is? Like, we just talk about these topics and have like a real conversation with these teenagers, and it's cool because you do see like some really engage with it and be like, oh, I didn't know this information, or like this made it safe to talk about, right? Some people maybe might come up to a counselor another time and feel that safety, right? Or like, this is the person that would know about that topic. But yeah, definitely something like DARE, like back in the 80s, of scare tactics, scared straight programs, things like that. Like, we've definitely evolved as a field in providing outreach. Yeah, all those commercials.
It's like
and everything
scrambled
like that,
eggs.
just
It's like,
squeeze it.
I don't remember getting like DARE out here when we were in elementary school. I know we did like the what's it called? Like, they would give us like ribbons about like, drug free. You gotta stay drug free. You gotta wear your pin every day, your little red pin. But then that faded away. But I think like, we had fun runs and little like fundraisers. But I think that's as far as it went.
I remember DARE coming. I went to elementary school in Hollister, and so there was this park called Dunn Park, and like the school was like a little like kind of yeah, they took us there on the bus, and it was like all these kids, and it was like cool, like they had a barbecue and like hot dogs there and stuff, and like balloons, and then you saw like the Dare dog come out that wearing the detective like,
Oh shit, the Dare dog's here.
little Dare dog, and so everyone just got happy, and then they all then they like sat us
beat him
down.
up.
Yeah,
that guy.
fucking dog, and so we sat on the grass, and they taught us about how drugs is terrible, and we forgot the next day. Like, what the fuck?
The Dare dog was there.
So but you know what John was talking about, how going into school or like having that like class, like an psychoeducational class about like feelings and emotions, and like I was telling you guys earlier, I'm going to be doing a talk tomorrow in Santa Cruz High and talk about eating disorders. And this is my second time doing it. And so first time I did it, I was, it was pre-pandemic. So you're able to go into class and talk. And so, so I had to do like 4 or 5, I think I remember 4 or 5 classes I had to talk. And it was like for like an hour and a half, like each class, and talking about eating disorders and like, it was great because like after the fact, like I had so many students coming up to me after and talking to me. They're like, "Hey, like what's the information on your where you work at the eating disorder clinic? Because like I have issues too. Like I have issues with like not eating and and restricting, and or I have like a family member. I have my sister that she's like really losing weight quick because she's restricting and not eating, and so." Just having that, opening up that dialogue and being able to like talk about certain mental health issues, and especially like eating disorders. And it's not one of those things, especially in the mental health field, that we don't learn that in college or in our grad program about eating disorders, and so, but a lot of people deal with that. And sometimes they don't even have the language or like the wherewithal to even like think about like, dude, I have that. Like once you put a label on it, like, that's my problem, then it's like, oh crap, I do have it. This is what I'm dealing with. This is what it's called, so.
Or know somebody who got
Yeah,
sick.
or know someone, yeah.
And I think that's a great example of what outreach can do. And the sad part is, at least like in community-based organization, is how there's just not enough incentive to do it. If anything, like as a therapist, you got to bill for your productivity. You got to, obviously you got to meet with clients. And unless your program is built and designed to use outreach, a lot of it just kind of is word of mouth. There is really no opportunity for you to go out and do that. I feel like a lot of the times, the way that kiddos have outreach or have that outlet, I think we talked about it last time, was like through like mentoring programs, like Maya, you were telling me about like mentoring programs that you used to participate in. I remember that's how I essentially was introduced to outreach, like as a middle school kid, like kids from Bellarmine College Prep, like they would come and help us out, and it'd be like, okay, like then I went to high school. I became one of those mentors too, kind of like these are the high school kids that are sort of being the mentors and kind of like helping them out.
Because you know why? Because it's free.
Because it's free. Bellarmine ain't free. That shit is expensive as fuck.
The mentorship?
Oh, the mentorship? Well, yeah, that's free, right? It's all volunteer work, right? It's all like, you don't necessarily get paid to do that,
Hey, the incentive for that Bellarmine mentorship, though, that we did in the build program was that they knocked off half of my financial aid, though. So that was definitely a really good incentive. But for sure, I mean, I think all these outreach programs are amazing. And one thing that I think a lot of adults underestimate is that kids have a lot of good questions. And like sometimes they just don't know who to ask, right? I remember one of those days over there at Cristo Rey, dude. You remember we were doing all the activity books and stuff like that, and I remember one day I just decided, I think you weren't gonna be there, so I was the only one who was gonna be there, and I was like, you know what? These are all teenagers. I'm gonna just have a drug education day. And like these kids were asking me all kinds of good questions. I was like, just sat up on the stool up there, and I was like, all right, guys, like, I've studied drugs, different kinds of classifications of drugs, what they do, what are symptoms, addiction, things like that as part of mental health, right? Well, who here has questions about drugs? Like, who here just wants to know about drugs and like what that looks like and things like that? And kids had all kinds of good questions. Like I remember one kid had asked if you could overdose off of weed. And it's a good question. you know. But he had said, you know, he had heard that, you know, you can OD off of like heroin or cocaine or like other drugs, and so he wanted to just find out if you could OD off of weed, which you know we know you can't, right? Unless it's like the artificial one, but like just you'd have to take so large of a quantity for your body that, I mean, it would just be physically impossible to OD.
He's probably already at that point. He's like, did I take too much weed before coming into this class right now? Or-
He's on the brownies.
On edibles, you can feel like you feel like your body, you're
He's like,
leaving
this
your
guy's
body.
talking
You're
about
like,
this
shit, I'm not coming back.
Must be a sign, you know.
Quick question for a friend. Well, if you took it right before this class, not me though, not me.
You know, a
Question's
friend
not
of
for me, it's for
mine.
a friend of mine. It's for a friend of mine.
It's for the friend that didn't
Friend of
come.
mine sitting over there.
What if I took? I mean, my friend. No,
But
but like
that's interesting because I feel like in that instance, in that scenario, you're gonna get students' attention to what they're familiar with, or the lingo, the vocabulary of the
what
everyday
have they heard
vocabulary,
on the street?
right? You got family, you got neighbors, you got gang life, like everything. If you're immersed in it, not by choice or anything, but like if you just hear it all the time, you're gonna have these questions. But if we had the conversation of a random, you know, let's just say schizophrenia, right? Who knows what schizophrenia? Not a lot of people might, at least not gonna know what it is, or might have enough questions about it. So, yeah, I mean, that is interesting. We had a lot of activities like that we had to conduct, and so I just felt a lot of days like some kids just didn't give a fuck. Like they're just gonna do
That's
what they
true,
want
too.
to do. Like, you can have a lot of classroom management, and that's like, all right, guys, put this away. Kind of have like a stern, you know, stance in the classroom, but they know you're not their teacher. They know you're not giving a grade, and you know, I think one thing we messed up, or at least in my point of view, is telling them, yo, I'm not that much older than you. So it's like telling them that was like, I think it backfired on me because like I thought I was relating to you, but no. Like,
But this is that fine line, right, Jay? Because like, you know, like when I'm in high school, like I want to relate to somebody who's in college. I don't want to relate to a fucking old person. You know, like
You know,
they
that
might have the
50-year-old
knowledge.
coming in. Like,
Clearly, you know, Dr.
got a
Dale
bunch of
Larson out here,
ages
shout
here,
out
bro.
SU,
Bunch of
he knows all his
ageism, bro.
knowledge, but like,
it is ageist. I think we definitely are ageist in this culture, though. We are a death denying culture, and a lot of teenagers definitely do not want to talk about sex ed from like a 60-year-old. You know, it's true.
They don't want to talk
true.
to 26-year-olds about sex.
they don't want to talk that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
they're
know.
just kind of like.
Apologize to our elderly individuals that listen to this. I'm sorry. Sorry
You
for
got
our
two
ageist. Sorry for
gerontologists
our
out here in the
ageist.
room, too, but
Our ageist friend John over here.
it's not
He
about.
fucking hates old people.
I even got a certificate studying the elderly out here. It's
And
just-
that's why
Apologize to our
more reason
listeners.
for you to hate
John, it wasn't by choice.
I know he's trying to get him from the inside. You know, he's trying to learn about him from the inside.
You stumbled upon an extra credit.
But no, man. I mean, you think about it. Like, I like there was another question I remember from that day for the drug ed day, where like this girl had asked, and she had asked what was the difference between a hallucinogen and a stimulant. You know, because she had heard like, you know, of psychedelics and like hallucinogens and things like that, and she was like, I've heard that it's like trippy and like about the hippies and stuff, but it was like, okay, and I just try to explain like what that does to the brain instead, right? Of like when you're hallucinating, you know, sensory stimuli, and you know, compared to, you know, something like a stimulant with, you know, that you start taking too often, can have heart conditions, and it just reacts to your body in a completely different way. And that was something that she was just honestly curious about.
Yeah.
You know, but and they, what, you gonna just randomly go up to your history teacher and say, hey, by the way, I was kind of wondering what's the difference between a hallucinogen and a stimulant.
Yeah.
You're not gonna have that opportunity, you know.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of those times with those outreach programs, it's great because that's the first time that kids even see that, oh, this is an opportunity for me to ask that question.
But then, yeah, I think like to be really effective, how often or how frequent are these outreach programs going out there? If you're doing it once a year, and depending on the time of the year, students they're not going to remember. And if you're just handing out flyers, a lot of people just throw that shit out. You know, so I think depending on the frequency of it, you know, can help people retain that information, help the school really promote it, and be like, hey, another year later this year, are we going to have it again? You know, kind of thing. So
Absolutely. You know, one thing I'm really grateful for as far as Alum Rock Counseling Center is the fact that their program does focus on that, and you can, you know, the county does allocate, you know, money for that. Unfortunately, it's not as much as like what you would do for like individual services. So at one point, like usually it's like you usually do like a big push in the summer, right? Because at school you're trying to focus on like actually like opening clients and like working with them. But you're right. If the consistency is so important, right? You can't just like expect to do like this workshop, you know, on fucking eating disorder once a year or on substance abuse, and then just expect that it's going to create some change. Like, yeah, you're going to have that curiosity in the moment, but how much are you going to continue to reinforce these messages of like these are topics we need to talk about, right? This is something that we need to continuously discuss. It's not just like, oh shit, like, oh, this is like my off period, right? Like, okay, like this guy's coming in to talk to me because the actual teacher didn't come. You know, so here we are talking about this. So there is that sort of like fine line, and it has that downside, right? Where because I think the outreach programs are so dedicated or so kind of structured where, you know, the people that are doing it are kind of just like high school kids or college age kids that are doing a lot of that outreach mentorship. You know, it becomes kind of like free flow, right? You kind of take it seriously, but you don't take it seriously. You get those one kids that are going to come out to you, but the other kids are just going to go in one ear and out the other. Yeah, but you know, it brings me back to thinking about what also like the role of mentors back. You know, how they also play a role in prevention and just like mental health. Like I remember, like I had a personal counselor in high school, but my mentor was the outreach coordinator. You know, I'd be able to go into her office and just like vent and talk about it. And I didn't know that was having kind of like a therapeutic session, you know, but it was like these mentors out here that were also just like so important. I remember that was just like my first feeling of having like a mentor or having somebody to kind of just help you. And obviously a mentor is somebody different than a therapist, but I feel like we've all kind of had experience where like we've had that mentor that's been able to kind of hold that space and create that. I know for John, I know in high school you definitely saw like somebody like Jeremy Lum, right? Like who was a teacher, right? He wasn't a therapist. I mean, he shout out to Jeremy Lum, you know, like if anything, you know, he was going through a lot of his own mental health stuff, you know, but he was there for you and just being able to just like help kind of guide you, you know, with whatever you're going through.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that as a teenager who's confused and has all kinds of, you know, questions about the world, it definitely helps to have a mentor, you know, somebody that, you know, is somebody that you can trust, somebody that you can ask these questions to, you know. And yeah, of course, you're going to have the other guys in the class that are definitely not paying attention, doodling, or, you know, making fun or just not taking it seriously because it's not a real class, right? Like you mentioned that, and I think you did too, Maya, with like assemblies where people are only half paying attention. But that's why I really did like Cristo Rey's program, because it was once a week. You know, it's like every Friday, you know, the kids knew that we were going to do this program with them.
Everybody for tuning into Therapy House. Here to remind you to check out our Linktree at Linktree/therapy_house. There you can find all the links for our podcast website, the different platforms that we are broadcasting on, individual links to our personal pages, like, comment, rate, and review our podcast so that we can grow, and of course subscribe so that you'll be the first to know when we drop something new. Until then, we'll see you next time.